Ken Hyland is a professor of applied linguistics and education at the University of East Anglia, UK. He was previously a professor at University College London and the University of Hong Kong and has taught in Africa, Asia, and Europe. He is best known for his research into writing and academic discourse, having published over 240 articles and 28 books on these topics with 51,000 citations on Google Scholar. A collection of his work was published by Bloomsbury in 2018 as The Essential Hyland. His most recent books include his editions of Second Language Writing and Feedback on Second Language Writing, Academic Discourse and Global Publishing, Specialized English, and Novice Writers Writing for Publication. Ken was editor of GAP and Applied Linguistics and is a visiting professor at Jin University, China. Today, Professor Hyland will be sharing his work on reworking research, interactions in articles and blogs. So we are very, very excited to have him here today and to be able to share this lecture with all of you.
Thank you for being here. Thanks to Nadia for inviting me. And I'm full of admiration for anybody who edits a journal. I've done it a couple of times and it's a lot of hard work. I appreciate you you tuning into this, and I hope you're all staying safe and cheerful in these difficult times wherever you are. This mode of presenting is new to me, as you would have guessed from that hiccup, and I have to tell you, it's a weird experience talking in an empty room to 100 people. Particularly, it's ironic because I'm going to be talking about interaction. So I just hope somebody is there. What I plan to do is look at how academic articles are reworked for a different audience in blogs using my stance and engagement model of interaction. In particular, I'm interested to see how the ideas in journals appear in blogs for a wider readership and how writers express a stance and engage their readers to do this in a new context. First of all, it's worth saying a little bit about blogging because I think this is probably one of the biggest changes the internet has brought to scholarly communication. They allow academics to increase the visibility of their research and themselves and to meet universities' increasingly strident demands for public outreach. So taking research beyond the ivory tower, exchanging knowledge with the wider world. Now, I know that many blogs are written by science journalists, but I'm focusing here on those written by academics who are blogging about their own recently published work. So here, writers need to rework or recontextualize the research they publish for specialists in journals for readers who might not usually read articles. And of course, to do this, they need a very different way of presenting ideas and relating it to readers. So I'm going to be talking about a study that I did with my ex-student, Joanna Zhao, and I, using the stance and engagement model, to compare the interactive features in 30 blog posts with 30 related published articles by the same authors. So what do blogs have going for them? Well, they're popular with writers because they allow them to reach non-specialists outside their discipline and a wider interested public. They allow them to not only share their work, but to get feedback on it, to see how people are responding to their ideas, to make use of affordances of the internet, like hyperlinks and graphics, which makes them easier to use. And they allow interested publics to join a discussion with scholars. So they've, blogs have been called virtual water coolers around which people interested in a topic can hold a discussion. They're in They also have advantages for readers. So they're rhetorically and financially more accessible than research papers, which are often locked behind a paywall. They're less top-down and one-way because they provide opportunities for readers to respond through the comments section. And this makes them a more egalitarian form of communication, contributing to what's been called a democratization of science. And they offer a more succinct and reader-friendly presentation because writers have to avoid the lengthy arguments, dense, compressed, constantly referring to the literature, citations, tables. They can get rid of all that to reach a very heterogeneous audience that's not familiar with that kind of argumentation. So in other words, blogs blur the boundaries between professional and general readers and between academic and popular genres. So this means they require writers to use very different interpersonal choices for these different audiences. Now, one problem for writers, of course, is that readers can come back at them very quickly. They can post immediately, sometimes with blunt criticism, sarcasm, and even abuse. So blogging can be a kind of tense and troubled form of writing for academics. It's a challenging thing to do. Okay, so now to look at the ways that writers rework their research for blogs. We focused on their interpersonal choices using the stance and engagement model. Now this sees writers as taking a stance to convey their attitudes and credibility to what they're talking about, and to engage readers by explicitly bringing them into the discourse. To give you some idea of what these things look like, this is an extract from a dog walker's guide, not an academic text, but if you see here, I've underlined some of the features that are worth looking at. The writer isn't just presenting a route by listing changes of direction, but trying to see the walk from the reader's perspective. So the writer uses imperatives, first and second person pronouns, evaluative commentary to involve himself in the text to convey information more clearly and to engage the reader as a fellow walker and dog owner. So you can take all this stuff out and you'd still be able to follow the walk, but it would be a lot less interesting, a lot less engaging, and you wouldn't feel that the writer was involved. So more formally, stance is a writer-oriented aspects of interaction, and it has three components: evidentiality, effect, and presence. So evidentiality is the writer's commitment to the reliability of information. So either toning down a claim using hedges or ramping it up using boosters. Effect is the writer's attitude to what he or she is saying, using attitude markers. And presence is the extent that writers choose to intrude into a text using first-person pronouns. So that's how they take a stance. Now, the other side of interaction is not how the writer presents themselves and what they say, but how they bring the reader into it. So engagement is an alignment dimension where writers recognize the presence of their readers in the text, how they connect with others to focus their attention, include them as participants, and guide them to interpretations. And there are 5 main ways that academic authors make these connections. So reader mentions, these bring readers into the discourse through second-person pronouns, particularly inclusive we. Questions invite direct collusion. They address the reader as somebody who is interested in the issue that the question raises. Directives are instructions to the reader. they're mainly imperatives or obligation modals, and these instruct the reader to act or to see things in the way that the writer intends. Appeals to shared knowledge ask readers to recognize something as familiar or accepted. And personal asides, these are things that interrupt the ongoing discourse. They don't add anything to the ideational aspects, the content, but offer a brief comment on what's being said. So this is how the stance and engagement model looks diagrammatically. The ways that we convey a stance, and on the right, the ways that we engage readers. Okay, so in this particular study, we compiled 2 corpora of 30 blog posts corresponding to 30 published articles in peer-reviewed journals by the same authors. So it's the same research by the same authors in 2 different venues. The article corpus is obviously much, much longer, but when we look at the features per 1,000 words, I don't think this is going to make a lot of difference. Now, the posts that we chose to include in the study we took from the London School of Economics Impact blog, and this is one of the world's oldest and most influential websites for social science blogging. In this site, each post is limited to 1,000 words, and submissions are reviewed by a team of editors for their novelty, their interest, and their readability. So they all have, they all meet certain criteria. And the site claims to get 70,000 readers every week. I mean, that's an enormous number. If I publish something that gets 7 readers, I open a case of Prosecco. So anyway, we used AntConc, which is a text analysis program, to search for the items in the list in my 2005 book. And we used the program SPSS to determine statistical significance. So what do we find? Okay, so overall, we found 2,500 devices in the blogs and 10,200 in the longer research articles. When we norm this for text length per 1,000 words, we see that this was 68.7 stance features in the blogs compared with 50.1 in the RAs in the articles, 10.8 engagement features in the blogs per 1,000 words and 6.6 in the articles. And it's showing that the blogs are far more interactive. Writers are obviously very aware of the need to take very different interactive positions in the 2 genres. It's not really surprising. I mean, I'm not probably saying nothing that's not intuitively occurred to people, that there are significantly more interactive features in the blogs than in their articles. 61% more engagement features, for example. Okay, let's take a look at stance. Okay, now, as I've said, in presenting arguments, writers express their judgments, opinions, different commitments to what they say. They boost or they tone down claims and criticism. They express surprise, importance. They put themselves into the text. So the table here shows, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a lot of numbers in this presentation. The table shows much higher frequency for stance markers in the blogs. And all differences are statistically significant. Attitude markers, in fact, had 80% more cases in the blogs than in the articles. So the journal articles, there's not a lot of affect going on. Let's look at each of these features. Hedges and boosters. So hedges and boosters express a stance by signaling the writer's commitment to a statement. Excuse me. Oh, I've spoken more in the last 10 minutes than the whole 2 months of lockdown. Excuse me. Okay, that's better. Hedges and boosters modify the writer's commitment. They either increase or weaken the scope, the relevance or certainty of the writer's position on things. So in the table we just saw, hedges are the most frequent resource for writers in both genres. And these are words like perhaps, may, might, probably, so on. Now, hedges signal appropriate scholarly caution. So they indicate a claim is based on the writer's plausible reasoning rather than certain knowledge. So they signal awareness that other people might have a different view. They seek to minimize criticism. So we can see here from the bolded text that these writers are actually being very, very cautious in the statements they're making. Now, hedges are significantly more frequent in the blogs than in the articles because blogs are far more interactive and evaluative genre than research articles. In addition, blog commenters have a reputation for rudeness. So hedges perhaps acknowledge that readers can respond publicly, immediately, and often harshly below the post. So in a corpus of academic blog responses, Maria Luzon in 2013 found criticism, irony, sarcasm, insults in blog posts, in blog responses. She concludes, in blog discussions, interlocutors explicitly engage in the adversarial method of argument, where one's claims are defended by showing that the other party is wrong. This involves engaging in argument that is more overt, explicitly antagonistic, and personal than in most academic genres. So in this context, using hedges might be some kind of survival strategy. So to my knowledge, no one has asked or answered this question. Based on these data, it seems that. So the statements are being deliberately restricted, they're being limited, perhaps as a way of self-defense, because of the openly hostile context that the blogger is writing in. They're trying to acknowledge the potential for disagreement because the readership is far less predictable. You don't know who's on the other end of that blog waiting to come in and criticize you. Now, boosters, in contrast, are words like must, certain, prove, definitely. And perhaps surprisingly, given what I've just said about hedging, they're also significantly more frequent in the blogs. And again, we can attribute this to the audience. When writing for journals, authors assume that readers are familiar with the literature on the topic and academic conventions of caution. So in academic articles, writers don't have to push things so hard for readers to realize that it's important or significant. They can draw on their shared knowledge of the literature. When rewriting for a blog, they can't assume that readers have got that shared topic knowledge to recognize the significance of information in the same way. So relevance and importance might have to be boosted to get attention. So writers strengthen the original claims so readers get the point. This study could be extremely useful, undoubtedly the economics undergraduate degree is very healthy in the UK. So boosters help remove any doubts. They upgrade statements to emphasize their significance, their uniqueness, or originality. The writer is banging the reader over the head with this so that they get the point. But at the same time, by doing that, you're closing down opposition. If you hedge, you're opening a space for the reader to dispute what you're saying. If you're using a booster, you're closing that space, and this can be a risky strategy. These are claims to truth. Now, it's also interesting that boosters, that the majority of boosters, the most frequent ones in blogs, are what Vassileva calls belief boosters. I think it could transform this, in our view. So these express a much higher degree of writer commitment than solidarity boosters like this. In fact, the current situation, this will always involve. So while these are boosting the statements, belief boosters carry the stamp of personal authority and commitment. It's a way of interesting and convincing readers. So this contrasts with solidarity boosters, which are far more common in articles. So we're more likely to see the less personal kind, which engage readers by appealing to the shared understandings of a specialized readership. So blog writers then face this kind of balancing act. They have to juggle the need to hedge against immediate public hostile criticism of a potentially less restrained audience, and boosting claims which might otherwise go unnoticed, which might not be seen as new and important. Okay, moving on to the second stance feature, which is affect. Writers express their attitudes to what they're saying far more in blogs than in journal articles. 80% more cases in per 1,000 words. Now, of course, any choice of one word rather than another expresses an attitude. You know, it's the old freedom fighter versus terrorist. You know, you're making you're expressing an attitude by your choice of word. But I'm talking here about explicit signals of affect and personal feeling. Now, they also work differently in the two genres. Attitudes in articles signal the writers linked to a shared disciplinary values with readers. In blogs, they help to promote a more informal and accessible tone. So blogs are littered with attitude markers. They indicate the writer's response to things. They point out what's important. They encourage readers to take note and so on, to engage with the topic. So Dunas has identified 3 functions of attitude markers, which he calls assessment, significance, and emotion. So assessment attitude conveys the writer's attitude about whether something is insightful, whether it has novelty or validity, its quality. Significance attitudes comment on relevance or importance, and emotion are affective judgments. And this table shows the 3 functions in our corpora, and we can see that the blogs carry, they're more frequent in the blogs than in the, all 3 types were more frequent in the blogs than in the journal articles. Again, showing bloggers trying to harmonize detached information, subjective evaluation, and interpersonal negotiation with the reader. So over half of all markers in both genres conveyed the writer's assessments about statements. So the results were illuminating. Our review points to some promising themes. This is an interesting idea. The smallest proportion in both genres was those showing emotion. Strangely, unfortunately, not a happy position. So far less of these. Stressing significance is more frequent in journal papers as authors show the importance of their claims to the discipline. This is vital to this. This shows the importance. This could be a dynamic and effective solution to the problem. It also comprises 25% of the functions in the blogs, where it underlines the importance of the writer's contribution. So in blogs, it has the added advantage of making it harder to challenge. Okay, the final aspect of stance is self-mention. And as I've said, this is the extent that writers intrude into their text using the first person. So how we understand a writer's stance and their attitude to what they're saying is heavily influenced by their use of the first person. But in recent years, it's declined in research articles in the last 50 years. Kevin Jiang and I wrote a paper on this a couple of years ago. But it also seems to have declined or been not so popular in blogs, where it makes up only 15% of the stance features. But it does seem to be useful in giving a sense of the author's reflection and allowing writers to speak directly to readers. It's also a key marker of informality, Of course, it brings the writer and the reader closer together. So it exploits really the connection that blogs have with conversational sharing. So in blogs, self-mention helps present information through personal experience and trustworthiness, rather than based on research findings and experiments. So drawing on our experience, we hope to articulate, we contend that this, I want to share how my thinking has changed. So the use of I and exclusive we helps bloggers seem somehow less threatening and know-it-all. It helps them to get their ideas accepted by a far more diverse audience. But as I said, self-mention accounts for the lowest proportion of stance features in both blogs and research articles. In journals, this is because of the need for objectivity and open-mindedness, less personal commitments. And while we might expect a stronger authorial presence in the blogs, this is mainly conveyed through boosters and far greater use of attitude markers rather than through self-mention. Excuse me. Okay, moving on to engagement. And again, this is the way that writers rhetorically acknowledge the presence of their readers. It means recognizing and including the reader in the text. And this has two main purposes. First of all, to meet readers' expectations of inclusion. So when we read an academic text, we want to know that the writer is taking our position or potential position into account. We want to be involved in a dialogue rather than a monologue. So readers are addressed as participants using reader mentions, that is you, inclusive we, and asides. But also there's a more rhetorical reason to position readers, to predict and respond to possible objections. So here the writer pulls the reader along with an argument to guide them to interpretation using questions, directives, and shared knowledge. Now, engagement features are far less frequent in the journal articles than in the blogs, and less frequent than stance. But we can see that reader mentions and questions are the most frequent forms in the blogs, and directives and shared knowledge are the most frequent forms in the research articles. Questions show the biggest difference between the two genres, with 4.5 times more cases in the blogs, and reader pronouns accounted for the largest frequencies and proportion overall in both genres. Now I'm just going to mention the 3 most frequent of these. I don't have time to go through all 5. So let's firstly look at reader mention. Now, reader pronouns offer the most explicit way of bringing readers into a discourse because it directly refers to them. They account for nearly half of all engagement markers in the blogs, and they're over twice as frequent as in the articles. So this table shows that there are also differences in the types of reader pronouns. So inclusive first person, we, our, us, are far more common in the blogs with a far higher proportion of all forms. I was a bit surprised at this really, but generally reader pronouns are pretty scarce in the research articles, 2 per 1,000, every 1,000 words. And they have been getting scarcer in recent years because writers, I think, try to avoid engaging their readers in such a direct and personal way. Blog writers seem to be less concerned about this. Reference to the reader as a strategy, which again borrows from more personal forms of interaction. It creates greater intimacy and proximity, as we can see in these examples. This in turn will increase your chance of grant procedures and foster your career potential. The first time you go to a magic show, you're likely to do this. If they explain the trick to you, you won't be fooled by it. So there's a lot of intimacy here. The writer is directly talking to the reader. So you and your evoke this kind of conversational intimacy, this face-to-face spoken discourse feature. And it allows writers to engage readers more closely. So they talk to the reader as someone who's similar to them, who can see the reasonableness of the statement. The use of inclusive we works slightly differently. It works to evoke a shared understanding between writers and an uncertain audience. So it tends to create a bond of likeness rather than intimacy. So conference presentations, we almost have them coming up all the time. We are often thinking about it, what we have to say. As a community, how can we better communicate with the complexities of open access? So inclusive we then attempts to involve readers and head off opposing views. This is particularly important in blogs where writers can't really be sure of who their readers are and what their readers know. So without the certainty of shared knowledge, writers create this joint social world through we. And this personal appeal is particularly effective when it's combined with questions. So we often see we with questions. This is a very, very common strategy in the blogs. Relationships don't appear out of thin air, so where do you start? Do you think these criteria signify academic excellence? What do we mean by learning? So while they're often avoided by researchers in social science journal articles, second person hits exactly the right tone when they form their work into blogs. The next feature I want to look at are directives, and these instruct the reader to perform an action or to say things, see things in a way determined by the writer. They're generally expressed through obligation modals like must, should, have to, and imperatives like note, consider, imagine, see. Now, as I've said, engagement features often run together in packs, and this is most effective where they're combined with reader mention. So bringing the writer and reader closer together and closer to agreement. So you don't want to do any of that. You want people to do. Try it out, see if it works for you. Get your point in early, grab your audience's attention. So we can see here that the writer is really pulling out all the stops to get the reader on board here. And directives are generally far less common in the soft knowledge articles. They're far less common in the humanities, social sciences than they are in the STEM subjects, engineering, science, technology, medicine. But they're also significantly less frequent in the blogs than in the articles. This is because directives carry a certain amount of risk. Because if you're saying to a reader, do this or do that, you're trying to focus their attention, getting them to look at things in a certain way, telling them how they should understand an argument. And there's a risk here that you're going to alienate them. Maybe readers don't like being told how they should understand something. So directives threaten engagement. They might undermine proximity by and alienate readers. So they're not so common in either blogs or articles. But not all directives are the same. There are three main functions. So cognitive acts, these position the readers by telling them what they should think. And these comprise almost 40% of forms in both the blogs and the articles. And this is what they look like. Think about the consequence of doing it. Be sure to do this. Always take this into account. Now, so they're actually telling the reader how they should understand something. So being sensitive to a readership from outside the author's immediate discipline means that strong cognitive directives, which instruct them to see things in a certain way, can be a bit too in-your-face direct. The most frequent directives in blogs are physical acts. And these ask readers to carry out some real-world action. So the online immediacy of blogs seems to encourage these physical acts as they offer a more personal involvement in ideas and research activities. So they look something like this. Scientists can and should use this. We need to stop treating the market as this. Scholarly associations have to seize the opportunities. We must not continue in this way. So getting readers to do something, to be active rather than to think something seems to be a more comfortable form of directives for bloggers. Finally, textual acts direct readers to another text or another part of the same text. So these are in articles, they look like this: see example 2, look at the second column, refer to Wallace for an overview. So these are far less common in blogs for obvious reasons, because much tighter word limits in blogs, less need to refer back and forward through the text. And more importantly, blogs lack the citations, the tables, the graphs, and other paraphernalia of longer text where that the writer needs to refer readers to. So not only is there less space for all this in blogs, but readers expect less of this kind of support from citations. So once again, these different contexts help account for different choices and different interactional patterns. Now, I don't have time to talk about the last 3 remaining engagement features. I'm going to drop 2. Asides have very low frequencies in both genres, and appeals to shared knowledge are significantly more common in the articles. When you're writing an article, you can make assumptions about the knowledge that you share with your reader far more than a heterogeneous blog audience. So if you're drawing on what you're claiming as shared knowledge in a blog, and that knowledge is not shared, you might actually be alienating the reader rather than engaging them and bringing them into the discourse. Okay, so this leaves questions, these are significantly more sorry, lost my slide there. These are significantly more frequent in blogs. So questions are perhaps the main strategy of dialogic engagement. They invite the reader into the text as an active participant. If you're asking them a question, you're speaking to them directly. You're talking to them. Now, in journal articles, they're quite rare because they risk stressing the difference between a knowing writer and perhaps a reader who doesn't know the answer. So in blogs, questions seem more natural and less manipulative because of the more informal, the more personal context. But despite this, almost all the questions in the blogs were rhetorical. The writer immediately presented his or her answer directly after the question. Definitely not. Answer, yes. How does one identify common areas of focus? There are no shortcuts. How can scientists work to dismantle unfavorable stereotypes? With selfies. So writers almost always answer their own question immediately. They're attempting to draw the reader in by an interesting question and then perhaps an unexpected answer. But questions are also less forceful than blunt assertions. It's a way of turning a monologue into perhaps a dialogue. Recruiting readers into something like a debate. And this creates informality, perhaps more immediacy, and it makes readers perhaps more willing to follow along and accept what is being said. And because of this, they are 4 times more common in the blogs per 1,000 words. But we also find blog writers using them as real questions to end their texts with a grand flourish, leaving the reader with a sense of this is an important issue that is ongoing. You know, we haven't solved this. This isn't the end. This is such an important topic. It's going on into the future, and these are things that that we might be following from now on. In journal articles, questions, though, are very different. They're often research questions which provide readers with a sense of direction. So if you give readers a research questions at the beginning of your paper, you're saying this is the way we're going, this is the direction, and you're asking for their cooperation in exploring an issue. So we get, are there limits to the scale at which? So these are research questions, and the last one is taken from this paper. So while we expect the writer to go on and answer this, there's a greater sense of shared exploration with the reader than there is in the blogs, because the reader has greater shared disciplinary knowledge. Okay, last 5 minutes. I've looked at the ways that writers recontextualize in a blog ideas that they've recently published in an article. And among the more obvious changes, such as reduced text length, eliminating citations and tables, are those concerned with writer-reader relations. Now, the ways that writers present themselves, their work, and their readers in blogs shows a sensitivity, I think, to a new context where a readership is less homogeneous and predictable. Most importantly, what this means is that there are more boosters and hedges to ensure readers see the significance of what they're saying and don't respond overcritically. There's more affective commentary on what's being said. They intrude more often using first person, and they mention readers more directly by addressing and address them with questions. So in some blogs, writers use features which are more personal and evaluative than we find in articles, and together this creates a greater sense of proximity and informality. The blog offers academics a chance to really present themselves and promote their work to a wider public beyond the discipline. And this is being encouraged by universities and by the rise of the celebrity academic, I guess. But writing blogs can be challenging. It's a different style of writing. We make fewer assumptions about our readers. And this is, it's not only challenging because it involves reframing knowledge, but also the delicate process of restructuring interactions. Thanks very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much. I will represent the audience.
Thank you.
I know that they're with me, but unfortunately we haven't given them that access yet. Okay, thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful talk. We do have some questions already. So yes, and people are posting as well, thank you. So we have some questions and I'll read them out to you. If we have time later, I will also make it an option for people if they want to raise their hand and ask their questions out loud, but we'll see if we have time. So to start off, okay, would you consider online publications such as Science Daily, which translate cutting-edge research findings in medical science, technology, and even language acquisition into more readable everyday language for the average person, as something academic bloggers can look up to as writing models, or maybe even TED Talk speeches, which are more interactive in nature?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's an increasing responsibility for academics to interpret their work for wider audiences, whether they're doing this in TED Talks or in blogs. I don't know that site, but I think with the with the pandemic, there's so much information that is not trustworthy. We need to get out information which is reliable, which has been tested, which has been peer reviewed, out to people. So I don't think, blogging shouldn't be replacing peer review and all the kind of dreary, long processes of academic publishing, because that has an important place. But I think it's important that we do that. I've just started a project looking at the 3MT, the 3-minute thesis presentations, which are very big among PhD students around the world. And this is an incredibly challenging genre, but it encourages PhD students to think about their research in a way that is accessible to a general audience, an educated but non-specialist audience. So I think that's something that people might like to do. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't think I don't think I'm competent to do it. I mean, one slide, 3 minutes. I mean, no. No, you need a kind of lot of energy and confidence to do that. But yeah, we should be trying to make our work accessible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next question. Did you have a list of lexical items which you associated with hedges and boosters when you used ANCONC? How exactly did you carry out your search? Right,
okay. There's a list that I've been slowly developing since I wrote a paper in 2005 in discourse studies called Stance and Engagement, or something like that. Yeah, so we had a list. That list has been slowly added to. I don't know how many items are on it. Is it 300? I don't know, something. But yeah, we searched for those items. We concordanced every case, every instance of those items to see that it was doing what we, it was acting as a target item. So was we exclusive or inclusive? Is it self-mention, or is it a reader pronoun? Hedges and modals are notoriously difficult. You can't actually tell what they're doing unless you look at the context. So we concordanced everything to see what it was doing. And we also looked at a proportion of the text to see if there was anything new that we could add. So, yeah, so we started with a list, but we were careful to make sure that the words were behaving in the ways that we were interested in, and that we included other items that weren't on the list.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. What are some measures that we can use for lexical sophistication and lexical diversity? I think this is related.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Lexical diversity in a paper, you mean stylistic variation?
Well, I will ask John maybe to clarify. Yeah, I will ask John to clarify, and we'll come back to that question.
Okay, all right, thank you, John.
All right, okay, well, let's move on to the next question for now. Okay, how can we distinguish stance and self-mention, we are us, from engagement, reader mention, realized through first-person plural pronouns? Could you present an example in order to notice the difference in the context of their occurrence?
Yeah, a common thing in certainly in research papers is in the methods section. We did this. We interviewed 10 participants. So that's definitely a self-mention. It's the writers talking about themselves. Students certainly in Hong Kong use things like "we all know." which is an inclusive use. So it's a reader mention. It's not what the writer is saying that they did or think, but the bringing the reader into the discourse. So sometimes there are cases where it's hard to identify, but 90% of the time you can see whether it's an inclusive use, exclusive use, self-mention, or inclusive use of reader pronoun.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. Would you mind sharing resources, books, and articles for those interested in reading about the different facets of stance and engagement?
Yeah, there's everything is on academia, the website Academia, free, except the books. I'm not allowed to put the books up, but research articles are there, and also on my University of East Anglia site. So I can send you the links, and you can get all the papers there free. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Thanks for the interest.
Wonderful. All right, next question. Do you envision these findings to be generalizable across different academic fields, such as applied linguistics versus economics, business?
Yeah, I mean, most of the research that I've done looking at these things look at disciplinary variation. So this is one of the first I'd looked at using genre variation, but normally I'm looking at, how does this discipline argue compared with this discipline? And obviously humanities, social sciences are far more, personally engaging than the hard sciences. But we've noticed some very different trends. The sciences are loosening up. They're becoming, using far more we, far more active voice. And the social sciences, humanities are going the other way. Applied linguists, we're becoming less personal over the last 50 years. So we're using more passives and trying to become a bit more, objectifying our claims.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. All right. Next. Okay. So this person says, I'd love to hear whether you think that some of the rhetorical moves that blogs make could actually help make scholarship more readable and accessible, especially at a time when we are trying to create a lot of cross-disciplinary connections.
Yeah. Cross-disciplinary. It's really hard. I mean, institutions, really privilege it. Everybody wants cross-disciplinary work, and it's actually quite tough because people are in their kind of rhetorical silos. The way that different disciplines argue is incredibly different, and there are also status differences. I don't know if you've tried to do any work with scientists, but we're not always afforded the same status as applied linguists as we think we deserve. So it's not always an equal relationship. But yeah, I guess the kinds of ways that that bloggers argue do make things more accessible. And I'm not saying that research articles should be like that. There are reasons why we have to be careful to justify what we say in research articles and dissertations. But when it's gone through that process, I think, we have every obligation to make it accessible, and maybe this is a way of joining with people from other disciplines. If you step away from these rhetorical silos into something new, then you can communicate with each other and with other people far more fluently, I guess. Thanks for the question.
Now, Colin says, love your books. Do you have anything in the works?
Oh God, I'm semi-retired. I'm a 20% professor. Give me a break. Let's see. We did 5 books last year. I did a second edition of Second Language Writing, which I'm quite pleased with. A second edition of a feedback book, an edited book on feedback, which was fun. There's a book on novice writers writing for publication with Pejman Habibi, who's a Canadian guy, an edited book. Something with Kevin Jiang on where this diachronic stuff comes from. We looked at 4 disciplines over the last 50 years and how language had changed. Because people talk about academic writing becoming more informal. It's not. Not in the last 50 years anyway. It's still uptight and difficult. So some disciplines are moving faster than others. So there's that book. What have we got in the works? There's a second edition of the Bloomsbury Handbook of Discourse Analysis. And I'm writing some papers on this 3-minute thesis, which I'm so impressed with these students. I recommend anybody to go online and just put in 3-minute thesis and look at these things. If you've never seen one, they blow you away. These people are so confident, so rhetorically competent. Presenting an 80,000 word thesis in 180 seconds with 1 slide. So that's what's going on at the moment. Thanks for the question.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll just do a couple more questions. So the next one is, a lot of text analysis is done by hand reviewing concordances. Are there any AI opportunities to enhance or replace manual processes?
Yeah, we can all be replaced by computers. Just hope it's not too soon. I'm not aware of any. I mean, there are. I think linguistic analysis always involves human sensitivity. There's very often language is polypragmatic. It can have different meanings depending on the context or the co-text. I'm not aware of any programs that can analyze accurately and do the kinds of discourse analysis that we would find useful. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm kind of out of the loop on the high tech, but I think we're always going to involve, it's going to involve human interpretation.
Yeah. And I think this question is a little related to that. So how would you label your theoretical approach? Would you say that you are using a particular type of discourse analysis to do your research?
This is from a postgraduate researcher, right? Postgraduate researchers are obsessed by theoretical approaches. I think their supervisors tell them you've got to have a theoretical approach. I don't think much about theory. I think that if something is frequent, then it's probably salient, then it's probably useful. So if people are doing it again and again, and they're doing it across many occasions of use, and many people are doing it, then it's worth looking at and saying, well, why are they doing that? And what's the function? So I guess my work is informed by systemic linguistics, although hardcore systemic linguists would not accept that. It's informed by pragmatics, and it's informed by years of EAP teaching. You know, that what is it that students are trying to communicate, and so it's really a functional perspective. You know, that language, we do things using language. What is it we try and do most often, and how do we do it? What language do we use in different contexts? Mm-hmm. That's it. It's not much of a theory. Not what you wouldn't put it in your PhD, but it kind of helps.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. And so I think, and let me just try to make John's question, try to clarify it if I can do it justice. So I guess he's asking if there are ways to measure lexical sophistication, if there are any tools that you use to measure lexical sophistication.
I don't know. I don't know what that means. Does it mean using difficult words? Does it mean using words that are not used frequently?
Maybe higher complexity words, yeah.
Because I guess there are different ways of measuring sophistication. I mean, is it sophisticated to use a word that nobody else uses? Mm-hmm. Or is it sophisticated to use a word that is multisyllabic? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. And I mean, I think a more interesting question is what kind of vocabulary works in different contexts. You know, how do you communicate with people? You know, what makes a good communicator? If lexical sophistication is one aspect of that, then fine, let's research it. But, you know, maybe the Queen knows more words than I do, but that make a more sophisticated linguist.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Liz.
Yeah. And then just where can we expect to find today's presentation, other than the recording that we will be posting? Is it going to be published in an article or a book chapter?
I think, has it already come out? We did publish it. Where is it? I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I think it's in discourse studies. I think it's in discourse studies, but I might be wrong. But I can tell you, and you can tell the people. Okay. And I see we've still got 84 participants, which is really good. You know, we've only lost.
Yes, it's, well, here where we are, it's lunchtime, so you know.
Oh, right, okay. But the canteen is not open, so it looks like a brown bag.
All right, well, thank you so very much for the talk, for answering all of the questions so thoughtfully. We are very grateful for your time and for the lecture.
I'm very humbled to be asked and to have such a big audience. Thanks very much, and thanks for your questions.